Lent, the mountain of God. Mountains are extraordinary places in many cultures. The Japanese artist Hokusai is perhaps best known in the West for his picture of a giant wave against which a small boat is battling. But this is part of a longer series of prints called 36 Views of Mount Fuji. In some of these, the mountain, volcano, stands majestically as the main feature of the work. In others, we see people gazing at it and pointing to it from a distance. In many of them, such as the famous Great Wave, it is not the main feature of the work at all, but it's there in the distance as people go about their daily business, fishing, building, grinding corn or travelling. I wonder where the mountains in your life are at the moment. We might hope they're in the distance, even behind us, and that the hard work of ascending them is over. We might secretly suspect that there are still more to come, as we see potential challenges ahead, and wonder whether we will be called to climb them, or whether we will instead be shown an easier route around the lush, lower slopes. Mountains occupy a special place in Scripture, especially in the Scriptures we associate with Lent. As the Israelites enter the wilderness, they come first to Mount Sinai, also known as Horeb. I wonder whether Moses recognised it. He had been here before when he fled Egypt after killing a man. It was on the slopes of Sinai that he had witnessed that strange, miraculous even, sight, a bush that burned but did not turn to ash. Sinai's slopes were holy ground for Moses. He had already encountered God there in the clear air of its altitude. For him, Sinai had already been a place of challenge and transformation, as the Lord instructed him to return to Egypt and free the Israelites. There he had changed from fugitive to liberator. I wonder whether he remembered this as they approached it a second time, whether it coloured his attitude and feelings when he began to ascend it again. For here he would again encounter God and receive fresh teaching, commandments not only for him, but for all those whom he led. He would walk into the darkness and cloud around the top of the mountain, be lost to the sight of those who waited anxiously for him, and emerge, his face shining with the reflected glory of his encounter with the Lord. Moses is not the only person in our scriptures who has a transformative encounter with God on a mountain. Elijah is in a cave on the same mountain, hiding from Jezebel, when he's called to go out and stand before the Lord. I'm sure you know the story. He first of all meets a great wind, but the Lord isn't there. He then experiences an earthquake, still no sign of the Lord. Then a fire, but no Lord. At last, in the sound of sheer silence, Elijah meets God. Standing on top of a mountain or a hill, it's easy to imagine the sheer silence. Elevated above the hustle and bustle of daily life, the noise of traffic, the shouting of children in the street, the thumping beat of music, all fade away as we too ascend the mountain. Gradually, we are left with the sounds of altitude, the rattle of loose rocks dislodged by our feet, the cry of a curlew or the mew of a buzzard, the harsh sound of our own laboured breathing as we toil onwards. Can we let these fade away into the sound of silence in which we can encounter God? But mountains are, of course, not only places of exhilarating meeting with God. They can be places of safety, like Ararat, on which the ark came to rest, a foundation of firm dry land in the swirling waters of the flood. Or like Mount Zion, which cannot be moved, but abides forever. These mountains are not a challenge to be surmounted, but their bulk and solidity reminds us of the Lord's protection. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people from this time on and forevermore, Psalm 125 tells us. But for others, the mountain is not a place of safety, but one of terror and lament. The encounter with God on Mount Moriah may end in relief for Abraham and Isaac, as God provides a ram for a sacrifice in place of the boy. But it doesn't start that way. Abraham's heart must have been heavy as he climbed that mountain, listening to the excited and curious chatter of his son Isaac. But at what moment did Isaac realize that this mountain was going to be the site of his death? Did he have a chance to look around him at the land spread out at his feet, and with the heightened sense of perspective that came figuratively from the enormity of that realization, as well as literally from his mountaintop viewpoint? What could he see? Perhaps it is this mountaintop perspective that we seek at intense moments of our lives, whether those brought on by our own impending death or by the deaths of others. As we look around us at the landscape of our story, past and present, what can we still see clearly? What do we find ourselves searching for, scanning the horizon in the hopes of it still being visible? And what has faded into the distance? How different do things look from this vantage point? I wonder if this experience is also that of the unnamed daughter of Jephthah in the book of Judges. When learning that she too must die to fulfill her father's vow, she pleads for 2 months' grace to spend time with her companions in the mountains, bewailing her virginity. For her, the mountain is a place of lament, a place to acknowledge before God all that she is and all that she has to lose. Perhaps also a place for the intensity of her life to flare up and to burn brightly in the presence of God. In the New Testament too, mountains are places of intense experience. During Lent, we might first think of the devil's temptations from the top of a high mountain and the comprehensiveness of Jesus' response as he commits himself totally to God. But there's also the mountain on which Jesus is transfigured, where Peter, James and John encounter the radiant glory of the Son of God, the Word made flesh. And the Sermon on the Mount, that second time of divine teaching, where this time it's not just a single man such as Moses, but all the crowd who through the teaching of Jesus are drawn into encounter with God. I will lift mine eyes to the hills, says the psalmist. To which of these hills and mountains do you lift your eyes this Lent? Where do you stand amid the mountains of your life? Where is the mountain of God for you? Are you at the foot trying to see the start of the path upwards, or seeking the courage to start climbing? Perhaps you're halfway up, wondering what you'll find at the summit. Or maybe you have reached the top and are looking out around you, seeing where you've come from and what lies beyond, wondering whether you're called to head down a different way, or return to your original starting point, now with the new perspective the height has given you. Perhaps, as with many of the Hokusai prints, the mountains are still far off, barely glimpsed in the distance, and it's still the valley wilderness through which you trudge. In these times, perhaps, we should remember that heights and lowlands are not so far distant after all, and we do not all need to be mountaineers to encounter God. The hill of Golgotha was only a few steps away from the agony in the Garden of Gethsemane at the foot of the Mount of Olives. Perhaps Golgotha, this green hill outside a city wall, unspectacular as mountains go, is the true mountain of God, the high ground on which all our experiences are drawn together, where the women and onlookers lament, an innocent man suffers and dies, and a repentant thief and Roman centurion encounter God. This Lent, whether we lift our eyes from the valley to the distant hills, or stand already on the lofty mountain top, may we remember that the Lord has made both and holds both. For in his hand are the depths of the earth, the heights of the mountains are his also. May the one who holds both heights and depths hold us and transform us by his presence, this Lent and evermore.